Hello and welcome to this special council meeting. I'm very grateful to everybody who came out for this. It looked to me like an especially opportune time to engage the public and everybody else who's concerned about housing affordability in Ontario. Madam Clerk, I understand we have regrets from Councillors Adams and Longo. Any others?
No, that's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, there are none. Council and the public, our only business tonight is to try to discuss so that I can gather your input, your feedback to all the materials that I've circulated for the last 2 weeks. And just to catch everybody up in case somebody's new, last month, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Paul Calandra, wrote to 50 heads of council, and he requested that we prioritize the top 5 housing affordability task force recommendations for his considerations. He also wanted the heads of council to fill out a oppose and support column against every one of the remaining task force recommendations. There were, depending on how you count them, but if you count up the parts of individual ones, you get like 74. They've done 23, and that leaves 51. And so what I'm going to provide him is a letter at his request, as all the other mayors who were asked to are doing. What we think are the top 5 that will do the most good the fastest, and what we think of the remainder. And this Minister of Housing, like the last Minister of Housing, is still promising to do them all. And he's asked his staff to hurry them up. And as you're going to see, staff and I think most of council, maybe all of council, believe that some of the recommendations either won't do any good or might hurt us. So, whether any of that is true or not, it's very rare for a Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to solicit the advice of mayors. I've only been a mayor for 17 years, and it's never happened to me. I'm sure in the history of Ontario it used to happen all the time, but I don't really think so. So we have a top-down system in Canada, the Crown system of government, and it's a very welcome change from what I've been used to. I have often referred to the town as the bottom layer of a 4-layer government cake, and it's unusual for the top layer or the second layer to ask the bottom layer for anything. So there you go. I requested public input from residents associations, the Chamber of Commerce, council members, and called this special council meeting to, I called this special council meeting so that, having circulated what I had gathered and having circulated a draft of what I thought of it, I could hear a final reaction to it. And it's due Monday. And if this all works out according to my plan, I'll have all day tomorrow to revise my draft in accord with what we hear tonight. And if necessary, all weekend to continue to write and rewrite the thing. So I just want to call out my thanks to the many residents, the We Love Oakville group, the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association, the West River Residents Association, the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, our staff and the council members who all sent me thoughts and recommendations. Now, when I looked at this, I tried to remember what the starting point was. And the starting point was that the Housing Affordability Task Force's mandate was to recommend measures that would address market housing supply and affordability. And there were economists involved, and I think all of us have a natural understanding of economics that supply and demand are what determines price. And when demand is greater than supply, people bid the price up, and that's the way life in North America and Europe, or I'll just speak to what I know, Canada and North America, that's how it works here. And if, as and when we get oversupply, when supply exceeds demand, prices will moderate. And so the government has set a goal to get to 1.5 million new homes by 2031 with the intention of making supply large enough to get prices to stop going up so fast. Now, as an economist, that's what I studied in undergraduate university. I agree with that is essential. They released their 74 recommendations early in 2022, and as of today, they've implemented 23, as I said, and that leaves us with the 51 that we're reviewing. I think I know everybody here, and I think you've all seen my draft letter and the 5 that I chose. And I also attached an Appendix C to the package where I marked out that I opposed 10 of them, and that 13 of them are going to need more information and proposed details before I could support them because they're a little too much of a pig in a poke. And I support 14 others besides the 5 I recommend, and I can conditionally support the other 14 depending on what those details will be. So there's one recommendation, for example, number 9, to allow as-of-right zoning of 6 to 11 stories with no minimum parking requirements on any streets that have direct access to public transit. As I recall, the recommendation, it might even only say access. I'm not sure it actually says direct access, so I'm editing myself as I speak. So this recommendation may make sense on paper, but I know our town, and our town there's a lot of variety in our town. And not all streets with bus routes are the same, and not all bus routes are equal. And so there's an assumption in that recommendation that a transit route is a transit route is a transit route, and we know better than that, at least here. So that recommendation could work on a major transit thoroughfare like Trafalgar Road or Dundas, but I don't believe it's appropriate for every street with a bus stop. I appreciate the input from West River residents who pointed out to me this detail, this little flaw in the recommendation. And that's why I've added conditional support to that. My number 1 recommendation to the government was what they would call C1, to use surplus provincial lands to build affordable housing and mixed or residential housing now, while we continue to work as hard as we can to maximize supply. We need to focus on affordable housing now as opposed to general supply, because the impact of increasing supply will not be felt on prices until we get to the 1.5 million in 2031. That's 8 years away, and we need affordable housing now. So since that's the most urgent piece here, that should be the target. So that's why I chose that as number 1. The remaining recommendations that I supported shared consensus from what residents and council and the organizations I heard from prioritized. There was number 6, which was permitting as-of-right multi-tenant housing province-wide, ensuring greater accessibility for all residents. Number 41, funding pilot projects and initiatives to create innovative pathways to home ownership with a focus on supporting Black, Indigenous, marginalized communities, and first-generation homeowners. That's our young folks. Number 42 is to provide provincial and federal loan guarantees for purpose-built rental, affordable rental, and affordable ownership projects. And number 50, and 5th, is funding the adoption of consistent municipal e-permitting systems and encouraging federal government collaboration in that endeavor. This recommendation also included development of common data standards across municipalities and provincial agencies by 2025. Surprisingly, in the great province of Ontario, records are not kept on a consistent basis, and so it's often hard to tell, it's often hard to compare apples and oranges. It's I mean to say it's hard to do an apples to apples comparison, because people are keeping their data. Sometimes it looks like apples, sometimes it looks like oranges, sometimes it looks like pears, if I'm not breaking my metaphor too badly here. So, in my State of the Town address, I pointed out that the new Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is promising to work more quickly than his predecessor. And in his letter, he suggested that he said outright that he's asked his ministry to, quote, renew its efforts to review and, where possible, implement the task force's remaining recommendations with minimal delay. I used to be, I hope I don't shock you all, but once upon a time I was an English professor. And so I look at every word in a sentence, and you'll notice in his sentence it says, where possible. This is an interesting thing because it means maybe not all 74. And as I said earlier, there's 10 or so that I'm not real keen about. And so it'd be, you know, and everybody knows I'm an optimist. So I'm hoping that this means room for progress. The implications for Oakville of some of the recommendations are serious. And in their initial review of the task force report, I want to give a shout out to our staff because this is the succinct way they described it. They said, some recommendations, quote, will either have no direct relation to housing affordability and attainable housing, or will adversely affect the municipality. And that's how we come up with our 10 that we don't support. Now, I'm going to, as I said when I started these remarks, I'm going to review all the feedback I get tonight and update the letter and respond to the minister. I appreciate the time that everyone has taken tonight. I would just add that there was a carrot and stick approach in this letter. If we don't respond, we could lose money. So number one, we would like him to listen, and he's asked us to tell him what he wants, and so he's sort of bound to listen. But number two, it'd be kind of churlish not to answer when somebody says, hey, let me know what you think. So with that, I have a slide I would like to put up. If someone could do that. Jess, maybe you could do it? I have no idea if I'll see it too. I will. So what I've done is I've abbreviated those 5. Because if I had put the 5 word for word, you wouldn't be able to read them. It'd be pinpoint type. So surplus government lands, I think, is pretty clear to, what that particular recommendation was about. As of right, multi-tenant housing, I think that nails what that one's about. Pathways to new ownership, provincial and federal loan guarantees, and funding municipal systems modernization. I didn't have room to put and standardization, but modernization, you should understand for also standardization. And digitizing, like the whole world needs to become more digital. We all understand that. And here in Oakville, we are moving quickly on that front. So I'll just pause now to ask council. We have 3 registered delegations. Would you like to hear them first? And then I'll poll the audience, see if anybody else has been inspired. And then I'll confine it to table, and we'll discuss. All right, Madam Clerk, would you begin the delegations?
Yes, the first delegation is Terry Branch from the Oakville Community Association.
Mr. Branch, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Before you start the clock, I must say thank you. And,
Well, if you're not near the microphone, the people at home won't hear you.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, just don't want the clock to start on me because we have lots to cover here, and I hope the information I provide would support what you're doing here, or what we are doing as a community in Oakville. Okay, so good evening. I have some slides. If you put up the first slide, please. Okay, that's not the first slide. No, go back, right, good, there you go. So, good evening, Mayor Burton and town councillors. The OCA aims to create a vibrant, safe, and caring community for everyone to enjoy. Next slide. On behalf of the OCA, I am responding to the housing affordability task force recommendation specified by Mayor Burton's letter dated October 13, 2023, addressing Honorable Paul Calandra, who requests from the mayors with the 5 top recommendations. Out of a list of 74, as the mayor said before. Next slide. So the first question is, why is the mayor predated letter to Honorable Calandra not based on input from this meeting? And he mentioned something before. Community involvement is essential. These initiatives, something's wrong here. These initiatives, we hope that the mayor's letter has not yet been sent to Honorable Minister as the deadline is approaching. We recommend a revised letter that considers the input from the OCA and attendees at this meeting. Next slide, please. We support this recommendation, recommendation 70, which suggests using surplus provincial lands for affordable housing. However, we are confused why the recommendation was not prioritized in the special council report, as it is Mayor Burton's first number 1 priority. Next slide, please. OCA is aware of surplus lands in the community, but what lands does the Mayor Burton have in mind to accelerate sale and development? OCA wants to know the process of selling these lands for building affordable homes. Next slide, please. Mayor Burton's letter to the Honorable Minister Paul Calandra fails to acknowledge the input and contributions of significant organizations such as the AMO, who offered sensible recommendations. Why were only certain organizations mentioned in the mayor's letter? Next slide, please. Mayor Burton's letter of ministry to Minister Calandra regarded his third priority, recommendation number 49, proposes funding pilot projects to help marginalized individuals, Black, Indigenous, and first-generation homeowners to obtain homeownership. OCA respectfully seeks clarification on the definition of marginalized people in this context, and requests information on who qualifies in the funding if Blacks and Indigenous individuals are not considered marginalized. OCA also wants to understand the rationale behind choosing pilot projects instead of directly providing homes to marginalized individuals. This understanding is crucial for comprehending the goals of the funding initiatives and promoting the more inclusive and equitable approach to addressing homeownership challenges in the marginalized communities. Next slide. OCA supports recommendation 50 and 58. As stated in the mayor's letter to Minister Calandra, recommended 58 was not a top recommendation of the Special Council October 12, 23. But in section 5C, the report qualified support was expressed for it. So next slide. OCA would like to have a copy of We Love Oakville white paper mentioned in the mayor's letter to the minister. Additional, OCA wants clarification on whether the term housing application refers specifically to affordable housing. Next slide. Appendix C lacks originator information. It aligns with Mayor's 5 recommendations, but not with the staff special counsel's report, top 5, as you can see from this table. Kindly clarify the reason for the discrepancy between the Mayor's letter to Honorable Minister Calandra and the staff special counsel report. Next slide. Mayor Burton report to Minister Calandra includes 5 top recommendations, which he said before, and they're correct, what he mentioned when he started. The 5 top recommendations and OCS support these recommendations. And next slide. So as you can see, these are the 5 recommendations, okay, that of the special counsel, which is not aligned with the previous one. Next slide, please. OCS supports the fair and transparent zoning for 6 to 11 stories building, but disagrees with eliminating minimum parking requirements near the public transit. This could cause congestion and limited parking availability, as well as problems with the buses. While OCA values promoting public transportation, we must consider the potential consequences of this decision. Next slide, please. OCA supports the recommendations here, but opposes removing the appeal process as aforementioned recommendation 32, removing the right of appeal for projects with 30% affordability housing units guaranteed for 40 years is opposed, as the definition of affordable housing is unclear. Next slide, please. OCA supports the tongue's support for the recommendation of this slide, but opposes recommendation 2, and you can read what recommendation 2 is. But the reason we oppose it is due to the negative impact on affordability housing, which is attributed to the fact that intensified development tends to lead to increase in wealth and power for select few, and can further worsen the socioeconomic inequalities and hinder access to affordability housing for the vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. OCA supports tongue's opposition to the recommendations shown on the slide. OCA is puzzled, though, by the tongue's clerk lack of support for recommendation number 5. Converting unused commercial properties into affordable homes is a great deal. It's a great idea, as long as there is careful planning, transparency, and infrastructure. Next slide, please. OCA supports some housing affordability task, the task force recommendation, as I've stated, but is concerned about the absence of the representation from Ontario's municipal sector, as mentioned in Councillor Paul Best's letter to the Honourable Minister Calandra. Next slide, please. Councillor Best, letter, attachment AF, also expresses concern about impact of Bill 23 on the municipalities. In my September 18th presentation to this council, abandoning Bill 23 and discussing a comprehensive plan for immigration was recommended. Let's now include affordable housing in this discussion. The main issue is Bill 23. Next slide, please. OCA urges Town Council to collaborate better with OCA and other groups. OCA is very disappointed that utility upgrades, traffic congestion measures, and flood zone initiatives did not make it to the top 5 recommendations for Oakville growth and development. Next slide, please. OCA advises.
Mr. Branch, Can you wind up now?
Okay, last slide now. Oakville advises against submitting Mayor Burton's letter to the Honorable Paul Calandra in its current form. It should be revised to include correction and address the pertinent comments from this meeting. And OCA Council would please back Bill 23 for affordable housing solutions. Thank you, and sorry to go over, but thank you very much.
Thank you for your information, sir. Madam Clerk?
Next delegation is Ted Hogan from the West River Residents Association.
Good evening, Mr. Hogan. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Worship and council members. As most of you know, I am Ted Hogan, past president of West River Residents Association, past chair and current executive member of We Love Oakville, and co-author of the white paper that We Love Oakville did when this whole thing appeared. Due to timelines for responses, the very tight timelines, neither organization has officially sanctioned what I'm going to say tonight, so I am speaking as an individual, but I'm sure that most of the members of my groups would concur with what I'm going to say. Now, a number of you have probably heard some of the things I'm going to say, but I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to say them, and I think some of them bear repeating. We all know the need for and importance of building homes, especially for affordable housing for our town as our town and province continue to grow. We understand there are many dynamics at play here, economic, social, and political. There's a huge problem, and new, creative, and innovative approaches are needed. You've heard me say that before, that we believe that the provincial task force report was flawed from the very start. It removes almost every local planning power. This one-size-fits-all approach is not only simplistic, but undermines any sort of local planning decision-making. It lacks definition, especially regarding affordable. What does affordable really mean? Does it refer to less costly homes for the general population, or is it adequate housing for people who need homes badly? Both are important, and clarity is vital if we are to achieve the desired results. I am encouraged that the province is at least looking at developing clear definitions, and I look forward to some positive outcomes on that. The report also placed full responsibility for achieving results on municipalities with no onus on builders or developers who continue to push for maximum profits. The government's emphasis on supply side enables developers and builders to build more unaffordable housing with no attempt to force lower costs for homes for which there would be demand from people who currently can't afford to buy. It is interesting that after a number of recent hiccups with their plan, the province is now asking municipalities for feedbacks. Unfortunately, it's a little late when they've already gutted so much of our local power to control development locally. I sincerely hope that the provincial government has finally realized the importance of municipal input and cooperation, but honestly, I am skeptical. Generally, I do not support cherry-picking individual items out of a severely flawed report. However, I don't say however very often. I admit there are some recommendations that are valuable to support and hopefully result in some progress. I commend your move to not support a number of the recommendations. I think the number might be a bit small, but it's progress. And I can support most of the response as you've as you're presenting to the minister tonight. However, as has been noted, we do have a difficulty with the number 10 item, which is the right of zoning story for 6 to 11 stories with no minimum parking. I appreciate you moving that down to the list to conditional items. Just for interest, since I've done the homework on this, there do appear to be 9 bus routes in Oakville that run through single-family and detached homes in Oakville. So the implication of that going through could be quite devastating for a number of communities. I do support it on areas like Kerr Street, where there's already a mixed residential, commercial, retail. So I guess you've stolen a bit of my thunder tonight, so I appreciate that, and truly, and I won't take up too much of your time, but I do thank you for your time and consideration. I thank you for listening to us. And for anybody that hasn't read the white paper that We Love Oakville presented, it is on our website if anyone would care to check. Thank you very much, and good luck with your decisions. Yes?
Just one moment.
Yes?
Councilor Elgar, I think, would like to either ask you a question or say something anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Through Member Burton, can we get a copy of your presentation?
I'm sorry?
Can we get a copy of your written presentation?
After I edited out all of the things that are non-pertinent, absolutely. Who would you like me to send it to? Should I send it to Jorge or?
All of us, I think.
Or Ray and Kathy,
I
and they
really
can-
appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful, and thank you very much. And
Yeah, let's try to remember, we employ a clerk for this purpose. Madam Clerk, it's another one of your purposes. Next delegation.
The
please.
next delegation is Pierre Silvio.
Mr. Silverjo, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. I want to thank Mayor Burton, councilors, as well as...
Sir, if you want to be
pardon
heard
me.
at home,
Thank you very
need to
much
speak
for
into the
pointing that
microphone.
out to me. I just want to say again, thank you, Mayor Burton, councilors, and town staff for preparing this report, as well as the appendices and the revised Appendix C, which responses to the HATF recommendations. As you are aware, and I hope town residents are, that in order for the town of Oakville to be eligible for the province's new $1.2 billion Building Faster Fund, this report has to be sent to the minister by October 16th. And I thank you for preparing everything. I do, however, I know you're aware that I am one of the many residents who support affordable housing within the town of Oakville. I do not have an in-depth presentation. Basically, I would appreciate if staff or the mayor or whoever can comment on a few items presented in the staff report as well as Appendix B. I know with respect to the staff report on page 3 of 11, recommendation.
Mr. Silverjo,
Yes.
The purpose of the meeting is to offer suggestions to change the letter and the opposed support ticks on the boxes.
Right.
We won't be cross-examining staff or anybody.
Oh, no, that's fine.
So if you could get to the point, that would be in your favor.
No worries at all. I didn't realize the meeting was a comment on your letter itself. One thing in your letter, which I want you to put in a specific appendix, you said, our highly experienced and professional planning and finance staff reviewed the Housing Affordability Task Force report and determined that some recommendations will either have no direct relation to affordable housing and attainable housing, or will adversely affect the municipality. And in quotes, you said, report attached. However, I looked throughout many things. I can't find that report. Can it be presented, or did I
It was
miss something?
attached, sir.
Pardon me?
It was attached, and that's what's driving the 10 I don't support.
Okay. Which appendix does that refer to?
E.
Okay. I just wondered for clarification if you've presented it right now, Appendix E. So it's basically the list of what's supported, not support, and it's the revised. It's E. I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Sauvageau.
Yes.
We've circulated the draft of the letter and the draft voting up or down on the 51
Right.
accomplished recommendations. And we're looking for comment on those two things. Do you have any comment on those two things?
Well, specifically, you just mentioned before about this meeting is in regards to your letter. What I'm saying, the letter should specifically state Appendix E and put it as an attachment to your letter, which I have not seen. I don't think the report, the staff report, and all the appendices will be sent to the ministry. You only specifically refer to the attached report. So therefore, I would appreciate if the mayor would change the letter to incorporate this.
Thank you for your suggestion. I'm referring to Appendix C in terms of what's attached, because I'm speaking there about, actually, I beg your pardon. I am attaching that, and I thank you for the suggestion. I'll spell it out that it's Appendix E, but it's also reflected in C.
Okay.
That's how we decided which 10 we don't support or that we oppose.
Okay, fair enough. I understand what you're saying now.
Oh, good.
As you say, I'm always here to learn more, and that's one of the areas which I found a little confusing. And I think also the residents would find it confusing as well.
Thank you very much for the suggestion.
You're quite welcome, Mayor Burton. Take care.
Thank you. All right. Thank you to everybody who brought their advice. Is anyone else here who would like to offer any advice or comment? Mr. Belcher, am I right? Welcome. Council would be grateful to hear your comments, your information.
Thank you.
And we also like watching you raise that table.
Cool. Yeah, so my name is Jeffrey Belcher. I'm not sure if I still have to introduce myself, but cool. So I was only actually told about this meeting a couple days ago, but I went through the staff recommendations that I think you're basing your letter off of. It is labeled Appendix B, but it is Appendix E on the agenda, so that might explain some confusion with this bit. But I had a couple of questions, and I want to offer a couple of alternative perspectives on some of the amendments here. So this shouldn't take too long, but one of the things I saw was related to the minimum parking requirements. I think it's one of the amendments that you might conditionally support related to 6 to 11-story buildings along transit routes. I think that it would be productive to decouple those amendments into two. So one would be eliminating minimum parking requirements for certain zones, and then another one would be relating to the transit routes and 6 to 11-story buildings. Because those things, while I appreciate that the province might think that those things are should be coupled together, but I feel like in different areas it might make more sense to reduce some of the minimum parking requirements that we have versus for all transit routes. Period's a little blanket. I'm not really sure if it's very productive. On that, though, while I appreciate there's probably lots of people who wouldn't oppose a rezoning within many of the residential neighborhoods that transit lines go through. Part of it, I think, from the province's perspective, is that they see a lot of money being spent on infrastructure related to areas that are designated low residential or single-family homes. These zones typically costs much more money for the municipality to upkeep and service compared to more urban areas in Oakville, like Kerr, downtown, and the up-and-coming Midtown developments that we'll see. If we're going for bang for our buck housing, a great suggestion would be to rezone bits of these neighborhoods. That should be done in consultation with people who live there, obviously, but it would save the municipality probably a lot of money. It'd probably be good for the long-term health of the town. And it's kind of a tough truth, but in a lot of ways, the urban areas of Oakville do subsidize a lot of the single-family areas of Oakville. And if we do what's called a hectare analysis of the amount of money that each hectare brings in Oakville, we see that a lot of these areas are drains on the town, which isn't anybody's fault, but it is something that probably should be addressed. So I just wanted to put that on the record. On the housing affordability, I think there's a bit of vagueness in this report. While I am a big fan of the report, I think there's a lot of vagueness relating to the definition of affordable housing, which a lot of people have brought up already. Within the report, they say, quote, people in households that spend 30% or more of total household income on shelter expenses are defined as having a housing affordability problem. While there's not necessarily a definition for affordable housing that's agreed upon nationally or internationally, I think that's a great place to start because while I was living in Halifax, a city that faces a huge housing problem that's a lot worse than Oakville right now, oftentimes many students are paying over 50% of their income to rent, which is an insane number. And it's a number that we can change, obviously, over time, but I think 30% is pretty reasonable. And most financial advisors would say that you probably shouldn't live in a place where you're spending more than half your income on rent or something like that, because it's just such an enormous amount of money. I think that's a great place to start. I think on the federal level, there's a bit of debate as to whether we're going to get a definition for affordable housing. We'll see what that ends up being, but I think that would be a great ballpark estimate of what we should be planning for. The last thing I want to bring up is related to Amendment 29 and 27C. Just to reiterate, 27 is about preventing the abuse of the Oakville Tribunal in terms of creating new developments. I just want to read a quote from the page here. Quote, throughout our consultations, we heard from municipalities, not-for-profits, and developers that affordable housing was a particular target for appeals, which, even if unsuccessful, can make projects too costly to build. And obviously, affordable housing is a priority for the council. One thing that I think there's a bit of tension between the provincial government and municipal governments is that a lot of times, I'm not necessarily saying that Oakville does this, but a lot of times we see disagreements coming from the communities in a municipality, and they will fight with developers who might be bringing in affordable housing to areas that maybe don't want a new development. I think the term is called NIMBYism. It's a bit more vilifying than I think it's intended to be, but it ends up getting pushed to the municipal government, and then they pass it off to the tribunal because they don't want to make that decision. Again, not saying that anybody here is doing that, but that ends up being a huge problem across Ontario. What this amendment is suggesting is that there should be some penalties if we abuse it. And I don't think that, again, this council's doing that, but I think the position, specifically 29, quote, where it is found that a municipality has refused an application simply to avoid a deemed approval for a lack of decision, allow the tribunal to award punitive damages, that is desperately needed accountability for municipalities. For far too long, I think there's been too much power, too much kicking the can down the road from people in many areas. I think that this should be supported. And I think Oakville should set an example in terms of what this could be, because the Oakville Tribunal is totally backlogged. And there's steps being taken to clear it out, but it's not going to get anywhere if we don't address the issue of people abusing it. So, yeah. So anyways, to summarize, Oakville Tribunal, we should probably fix that up. and some accountability to municipalities is really good. I think we should support that. Affordable housing definitions, we should probably estimate around the 30% of someone's salary or income ballpark of what that looks like, and maybe plan around that. And the minimum parking requirements would probably be decoupled from other policies, since I think there's great benefit in that being applied to not just transit routes, but probably all around the area. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a question from Councilor Hazard-Thiel. Before we go there, I wanted to give you some assurance that for a very, very long time in Canada, we've had a national standard for the definition and measurement of affordability in housing, and it's been 30% of income, whether rental or owning. And CMHC has used that forever. I exaggerate, but only a little. And the only reason that there's a little bit of a controversy about it is in Bill 23, the province changed the definition of affordability as used in the Development Charges Act to a percentage of the market price as opposed to some measure of income. The 29 largest cities in Ontario, of which Oakville is one, the so-called big city mayors, we unanimously opposed that, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario also strenuously opposed it. And at the moment, the provincial government has a posting on the Environmental Registry of Ontario, which is where they post things. That's how they post things to get public comment on proposed legislation. And no, they don't always post every piece of legislation there for comment, but this one, they've now posted a proposal to change the definition back to including
income,
the 30% income test. So if you're an optimist like I am, any sign of progress rekindles your optimism that we're going to get somewhere. And so I thought that you might like to know.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Every now and then, somebody listens. And now let's listen to Councillor Hazlet-Thiel and see what she's got for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. I was going to point out that you can go on the ERO, which is the Environmental Registry, and read the latest proposal by the province.
Thank you.
I'm still not sure it's exactly where we want it to be, and in some discussions with our finance staff, there are some challenges around what will the regs say, but it is important that they hear your perspective. And I take your point about leading the way as a council, but I think the best way we can lead the way is to continue to apply critical thinking and our official plan and our understanding of what building community is, so that we do planning correctly, and that sets an example for others. I don't think we kick things down the road. I think we truly try to be thoughtful about not only today but the future. But I take your point that maybe some people don't. And then my last is, just so you're clear, it's not the Oakville Land Tribunal, it's the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Oh, sorry, I missed.
And the only reason I'm correcting you is because it may sound like we're backing it up, and it's not us backing it up.
I would never imply that knowingly.
So I just thought you'd like to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Belcher.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I'll take that as a sign that we should confine the table, and council, considering all you've read and all you've heard, do you have any suggestions? Are you content with the 5 I chose? Are there any support and oppose changes that you want to make or suggest? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. The number 6, permit as of right multi-tenant housing, renting rooms with the dwelling province-wide. Can we provide some wording attached to that to indicate providing they comply with local bylaws? I'm thinking parking, noise, all the associated things we usually have that are the tools we have for, like I'm thinking multi-tenant, how are they dealing with the parking associated with that? How are they dealing with, various other aspects? That's my only question.
Yeah, our position and staff's position are that zoning still applies. And so where we have parking rules would apply. This is similar to, we'll dive in here a second. What would be the best example you could think of in Oakville of this kind of housing? Wouldn't it be student housing? And if you'll remember, we've had every few years problems around student housing. And our ability to enforce the old restrictions on how many people can be in a house turned out to be non-existent because we have no power of entry. We can't do search warrants or anything like that. So municipal enforcement is very limited in terms of our powers. And so as a result, one of our counselors lives on a street where there's student housing and has for the 20 years that he's been on council, frustrated by our inability to get into the house and find the, so there's, those issues will remain. And we've actually been asking the province over my 17 years, often we've asked for enhanced powers and we haven't gotten them. So my fear is that, we could certainly say it, and I'll give it careful thought overnight. It might be worth just saying again. I may even find a way to word it around, as we have repeatedly asked you. There is a principle in what I've drafted here where I'm trying to play nice, which is to say, he asked for the 5 of the 74 that we most wanted to see, and he didn't ask for how I'd like to rewrite them, right? And so I'm torn between, right? And, but you will notice in the draft letter that I do not shrink from making the odd little suggestion, right? But thank you for that, and I will sleep on that one. Councillor Giddings.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question regarding number 51, where it was enabling municipalities subject to adverse external economic events to withdraw infrastructure allocations if they don't start construction within 3 years. From when permits are issued. That is not on the list. And do we have any, I guess better question for Commissioner Garvey. What opportunity do we have in terms of timing of the permits after the permissions are granted?
Well, Councillor, I gave careful consideration to that. And on Wednesday, we had a presentation at Regional Council where you used to serve. And when you look at the projects that have permits and are not yet finished, and you delve into it, what you discover is that they've been held up very often by us, by the municipal side. So it's a difficult argument to make when it's not a clean situation. It's, for example, we would like to believe it's malingering developers sitting on things for no good reason. But when you dive into it, you discover, oh, there's actually issues. And you'll remember Mr. Benson, he said, that number is a function of things moving through the system rather than people sitting on things. So there's a, it's hard to get a clean shot at that was the takeaway.
Difficult to distinguish
Yeah.
who's doing what.
Well, the audit might not be favorable to us.
Fair enough. In terms of, didn't see anything supplied by the province in terms of how we are able to curtail speculators that will purchase pre-built units and ride out the increases and then either operate it as a ghost hotel or an Airbnb, literally taking homes away from people that could have bought them or rent them. Anything through the large city mayor's caucus in terms of dealing with anything like that?
Yes, we discuss all these issues that are not in the HATF recommendations that animate every council. And I thank you for recognizing the distinction here that we're commenting on the 74, not on what isn't there.
No, I understand, just having talked to a lot of people since the report came out, a lot of these questions are coming up in terms of why can't you do this? Would the province allow you to do that? One of the major costs of having a home is the operating cost. You know, will the province look at improving the Ontario Building Code? So moving forward, it will reduce the cost of ownership as well as doing a solid for the environment. So those are just some of the questions that we'd heard from people.
Well, thank you. On the building code, there's good news. Every 5 years, the building code gets updated. It's on track for, I can't remember whether it's 2031 or 2035 to be net zero. The economy is a big system. It's hard to make it do a 180-degree turn in 10 feet. And so you try to move it by degrees, I guess, that's what they seem to be doing. But our voices are being heard on greening up the building code.
Which is great. I think we have to have that discussion on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. A little pressure never hurts.
Never did. Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of questions of clarity. Town does not support. Number 5, permit as of right conversion of underutilized or redundant commercial properties to residential or mixed residential commercial use. I've had a lot of feedback from residents about this, why we're not supporting that one. So I think for the public and for the sake of the public to understand, I think we just need a little bit more detail and clarity from staff with respect to that comment. Is that doable, please?
It is, but as the author, as the guy who's going to write the letter, I'd like first crack at that one. I cannot count the number of times I've sat in planning meetings here and heard members express very strong feelings about the need for more retail and more commercial. And so, and I've generally supported those statements when members here have said those things. You may even remember saying that a time or two.
Absolutely.
And so I thought, well, it would not be a good look to say here, yeah, convert them, and then in the other hand, say, no, we need it, right?
No, that's thank you for the clarification on that one, and I appreciate that, but it becomes an emotional issue with people on affordable housing that when we see vacant lands and a building sitting there, why not? And I think that's the challenge that we have to explain that to our public.
One of our delegates mentioned NIMBYism. You may remember, I know you will remember, the underutilized strip plaza that wanted to put apartments, rentable, affordable apartments on top. And you may remember that the neighborhood didn't like that.
Yep, I understand. And my last question on the town-supported recommendations was, just help me out here, number 49, Ministry 49, 41. We innovative pathways to home ownership for Black, Indigenous, and marginalized people and first-generation homeowners. Is there a reason why we specific mention those cultures and those issues? Why not just marginalized people? Why do we need to put all the
well, you've got to remember, we didn't write that.
I know, so you're just pushing it back to the province.
They wrote it.
Yes, correct.
And they wanted to know, do you support or oppose that?
Okay, thank you.
I could say, we could quibble over how to carve that up. I would have thought, but you know,
Well, I can appreciate that because we're looking at all Ontario and, you know, and I can appreciate that. So maybe I'm just looking at the Oakville situation. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
okay, thanks. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Your Worship. In general, I do support the recommendation, and I would be happy to give you the motion to adopt the recommendation if you want one. But I do have a concern that was expressed by Councillor Duddick earlier, and that is with respect to the issue of, where is this one here? Number 7, the multi-tenant housing, renting rooms within a dwelling. So I think there's a pretty fine point on it. I think you agreed with the points, but I think it's just to give it an extra vote, but also to say that I do support it in principle. I support this initiative in principle with some clarifications, because I think the idea of renting rooms is not only great from a perspective of creating additional housing opportunities, but it's also a way to keep people, senior citizens in particular, in situ, because it allows for home sharing, which is something that a task force that I chaired years ago recommended that we strongly embrace. However, as a ward that is heavily impacted by rooming houses, and a week does not go by that I don't have some sort of complaint, there needs to be some very strong wording here that would stipulate with strong regulations around, as you stated, access, inspection, licensing, et cetera, because we need to make sure that while we support this idea, this concept, we don't support the problems that come along with it. And particularly, it's the student housing, which we want to make sure there's lots of, but it needs to be safe and it needs to be fair to the community. But also, I think in this section, we need to be careful to separate that from Airbnb as well, because Airbnb, which is becoming the plague of our community as well, these Airbnb units, which would, I think, with this very general statement, fall in there, unless there was some clear definition, and we certainly do not want to be encouraging more Airbnbs at this point, because they cause a whole plethora of problems in our community. So again, I support the initiative. I'm happy to move it, but I would strongly recommend that as you have your contemplative moments this weekend, that you consider adding some wording to really put a fine point on what that looks like.
Okay, 2 things. Thank you for the suggestion. I've made a note to work out wording commentary around the necessity of strong regulations around safety and well-being. Okay. And I gladly accept your motion to endorse the proposed response.
Would you consider adding, safety and well-being obviously are fantastic, but would you consider adding neighborhood impacts? Because that would be things like parking, the Airbnb, et cetera. So just to be clear, because the issues that we hear, and honestly, I hear a lot of complaints about rooming houses, and it's not that the kids are living in the neighborhoods. It's the way that they're living in the neighborhoods, and it's not their fault. It's the people that are running these rooming houses. So I would greatly appreciate if you could consider some wording around neighborhood community impacts in general, but parking is clearly one of them.
I'll think about it. Community impact becomes so vague, I'm not sure.
That's why I'm saying consider wording in that vein. I don't have the wording for you, but if you could just,
But since you're fastened, the example you fastened on was parking.
Yeah, that's one of them.
That'll be my sort of starting point to figure out the words, to try to track to what you're saying.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who would, just to get the motion on the floor, is there a seconder for Councillor Knoll's motion?
Sure.
Councillor Elgar, thank you. Councillor McNeese, then Councillor Haslett-Thiel. Thank you, Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple small technical comments here.
Could I just beg you to move your microphone or something so that your voice will pick up? People at home will thank you, and so will I.
Okay, I'll try that. So number 24, allowing wood construction. So I see that in the updated chart, we've got an asterisk there and we've got a grayed out block to support. And the asterisk is supposed to mean that recommendations with asterisks have been implemented. And I looked in Appendix E, which is also labeled Appendix B, but staff's comment is that they could support the increased use of low carbon building materials. So to me, it doesn't strike it that we've already implemented. I think it's just that we would support it. if I'm understanding the methodology here. Because I believe the building code doesn't even support that yet, so.
Well, actually, Commissioner Garby, before I make so bold as to say, I heard that wood structures have been permitted higher than before. Do you want to correct me or anyway, clarify this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you said it eloquently. The structures, allowing wood structures higher than was previously mentioned has been implemented, which I think was the intent behind the words of already implemented.
So I can't remember how high you can now go, but you've depending on how high you wanted to go with wood, you've got part your wish.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it's just, for clarity, it's just support, but technical issue. So either way, I think we're showing that we're in favor of it. And then back up to number 9, the as of right zoning for 6 to 11 stories with no minimum parking standards. My suggestion is that we stay on the support side. We've got 3 asterisks, which means conditional support. I agree with the delegate that we've got 2 things going on there, and I think to assume that we would equally apply that throughout a transit network is a little bit concerning. There's different orders of transit, there's different contexts and different situations, and this is for all municipalities across Ontario. I think in Toronto it would be much different, Hamilton would be much different. My suggestion is that we use the 2 asterisks, which means that further information is required for support. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. I've made a note of that, and I'll reflect on that too. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, and then Councillor Knoll, are you, okay. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So just on the multi-tenant, so I like the fact that you are going to consider some additional wording, and I think Councillor Duddock made a comment about tools that enable us to make sure that this is an effective process in place. I had a recent situation and was advised that if, in fact, they did take out a license, that we had the right to enter. And that was one of the reasons that the licensing had been put in place in the town of Oakville, that we had an opportunity to enter and therefore could worry about fire safety and those elements. So we may want to just verify that with municipal enforcement because safety and well-being, in my mind, and the tools to ensure a positive environment for all is important.
Councillor, on the licensing, as Mr. Barry has often explained, the issue is that if they don't take a license.
Right, I understand that.
And so they don't.
Right, but this is now going all the way to as of right, so the licensing becomes moot. And so that's why I just, again, I'm not a big fan of anything that's that as of right and takes municipal options on the table, but you hear our concern. I also wanted to just reflect on, I really appreciated, you obviously went through Councillor Giddings and I's note, and that the surplus provincial lands being highlighted. I think that is a critical piece that has to be up there for the province to, I mean, relinquish those lands to Halton Region and to Oakville, because you know, we can do a lot if we have those that land to work with. I know we're not allowed to add to the list, and it struck me that the housing strategy discussion, that open house, which is October 18th, is where maybe some of these suggestions that are coming forward need to be raised. But with the $940 million infrastructure hole facing the region, we have to, we can't go a lot faster, which is, you know, what they keep talking about. So it would be helpful to hear from others at the housing strategy about how do we deal with this infrastructure costs that we're facing. But overall, I'm appreciative that you gave us the draft in advance, and I do have one request, and if there is a letter from the OBCM on their recommendations on the affordability definition, if that could be circulated to council, that'd be terrific.
There's no letter. We've been meeting directly and arguing in person.
Okay, just thought I'd clarify in case there was one. Thanks so much.
For some reason, sometimes that works. I'm going to add licensing to my list of things to consider on that. And I would just thank you for your remarks about the housing strategy meeting and add for your consideration that this is not our only opportunity to talk to the government. We have many times passed unanimous senses of council resolutions, you know, the exhortatory resolutions urging the government, and not just the Ontario government, but the Canadian one as well, to do one thing or another. And we haven't always been ignored either. So after the housing strategy, there may be an opportunity to send another letter. Councillor McNeese.
Sorry, just one additional note, Your Worship. I believe in your opening statements, you mentioned the RAs and groups that provided feedback. I believe our resident association, Brownie Village Resident Association, provided a letter as well. And if you didn't receive it, I'll speak to them and make sure you receive it.
I would be delighted to receive it.
Okay.
Would you like me? I don't know, this is where I'll tell this story at my own peril. When this started a month ago, almost a month ago, because it came out roughly September 16th and the deadline is October 16th. The immediate reaction of some folks with whom Oakville has sometimes not agreed, and I'm looking at you, Amo, they immediately said, oh, this is bad because nobody will have the time to consult their council and consult the public and consult their staff. And many of the big city mayors have done that, even though it was impossible. I only mention this because there's 443 members of AMO out of the 444 cities in Ontario. Toronto quit long ago, complaining that the vast majority were little towns and cities who spent all their time acting like they were jealous of Toronto and they felt like they were being dragged down or tied down or whatever, and they wanted to get out. And so you may remember when the province first attacked development charges, AMO came out in support. And you will not have any trouble imagining that made me somewhat cross. I was afraid that if I didn't get in there and punch back, my friend Alan here would hurt him harder. Because we care very, very much about who pays for what. So I thought it was important to show AMO, hey, us big guys aren't that slow. All right, Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. I forgot a note that I wanted to make. It doesn't change my support of the resolution, but the term first-generation homebuyers concerns me.
It isn't first generation, I don't think.
Yeah, it is. It says first-generation homebuyers, which by definition means people who buy homes whose parents hadn't previously owned a home. I quadruple-checked that definition in typical nomenclature in the building world.
First generation, yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm wondering. I imagine the sentiment is, because I can't find any caveats around that. I imagine the sentiment of the province is first-time home buyers, but I'm wondering if maybe you could add some wording around that to say that this is how we're considering that point, because it's not really fair to say to somebody whose parents may have owned a house at some point that doesn't allow them to participate in any kind of incentivization that might exist for pilots.
There is, I hear you, and I'll reflect on it. My sense of this is they're looking for something that would be means tested.
Yeah.
So it may not matter what we say.
Yeah.
And we may very well be able to say first time instead of first generation.
I suspect,
as a note on the side.
Yeah, I suspect that you're.
But I think you're going to wind up in the same place.
I think so, but I think this is worth pointing out just for the sake of clarity, because again, I think there's an equity issue that not all young people who happen to have the privilege of living in an own home necessarily means that they have any more wherewithal to buy a home than any other first-time home buyer. So I agree with you, and I think, the way I read this, I read it the way you're reading it. I just think it's important to be, words matter, and I think it's just important to be very clear.
Okay, well, I'm certainly not in a position to reword their thing, but I will comment.
Beautiful, thank you.
I will comment.
Much appreciated.
Hey, I've tried to be easy to work with for 17 years. I'm not going to stop now. All right. Anybody else? Then I'll ask if anybody opposes the motion. And I don't see any opposition, so I'm going to declare it carried. And I thank everybody. I have one more piece of business for you. We have a confirmatory bylaw that says we met. And we need a mover and seconder for that. Councillor McNeese and Councillor Shi, thank you. All those in favor, just for fun? Any opposed? It carries. Thank you, everybody, for your time and all the work you put into this. Everyone in the public who joined us. It has been terrific working with you. And I just want to make sure it's understood that no letter has been sent to the minister yet. And good night. We're done.